In the late 60s and early 70s, four sisters from Oakland, California formed a singing group looking to make it big in the music industry. By the time the decade was over, that's exactly what happened. They accomplished everything an artist would dream of: awards, fame, and all the fortune. However, that success had little effect compared to the hidden turmoil caused by addiction that took control of their lives. The trauma of a childhood rape, physical abuse from bad marriages, and the sudden rise of the crack cocaine epidemic would have a greater impact on their lives than their own musical careers. Luckily, because most of their personal challenges happened before the advent of social media and the internet, most of their personal issues remained under wraps. On this episode of Exposed, we look at the inside story of the turmoil that almost destroyed one of the greatest girl groups of the 70s and 80s, the Pointer Sisters. During the late 60s, Bonnie and June Pointer were interested in starting a singing group. June, who was a teenager at the time, and her sister Bonnie decided to become a duet and perform in various clubs around California. However, before they can get started, June would experience a major catastrophe that would affect her for the rest of her life. When she was 16 years old, she was gang raped by a bunch of thugs. And to make matters worse, as a result of the rape, she became pregnant and had to make the harsh decision to have an abortion. This issue would become the platform for the mental issues that would plague her, that would lead to her abusing drugs, experience bad mood swings, and at times adopt eccentric sexual practices. However, despite going through this incident, this would not necessarily hold her back from sticking with the group and pursuing a career in music. By 1970, her other two sisters, Anita and Ruth, decided to join the group. Previous to this, Anita and Ruth were in bad marriages and making a living by selling weed. After getting discovered and singing with Blue Thumb Records, they found moderate success singing pop and country songs. The girls would get their first Grammy singing a song written by Bonnie called Fairy Tale. They would also have some pop hits as well, like Yes We Can and How Long. During this time, which was the early 70s, despite the success of the civil rights movement, black artists still had to deal with harsh discrimination, particularly in the South, where Jim Crow was very heavy. While promoting their first album, the girls were invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, which was considered the monument of country music. When the group showed up to perform that day, they were faced with protesters who were against a black artist performing at the auditorium, which had never been done before. Whites were carrying signs and shouting the mantra, "Keep country country, keep country country." However, this did not deter the girls from going on stage and performing anyway. By the time they were finished, They impressed the crowd so much that they were asked to come back and do an encore. This incident signified one of the first times that country music started to be integrated by black artists. Another major setback occurred when June and Bonnie decided to leave the group. June wanted to focus on her mental health, and Bonnie wanted to pursue a solo career. Initially, Ruth and Anita reacted by deciding to take a break and consider retirement to concentrate on their families. By this time, June was having bad mood swings and around 1975 had her first nervous breakdown. What made things difficult for June was at this period facilities for her to get therapy for her trauma didn't exist. So self-medicating with recreational drugs for her and many others was the only solution to deal with their inner pain. June started experimenting with drugs at the age of 13. Over time, the girls decided to get back together and persuaded June to come back, forming a trio. They would sign with Planet Records, and by the end of the 70s and the early 80s, they would become one of the top singing groups in America. Bonnie signed a solo deal with Motown Records and married Jeffrey Brown, one of their producers. Initially, Berry Gordy got involved and helped produce her first album, but it met with little success. The girls, on the other hand, signed with Planet Records and took off running. By the end of the decade, the Pointer Sisters, as a trio, became one of the hottest acts in America. They turned out songs such as Slow Hand, Let's Get Excited, Neutron Dance, and Jump. Also, they wrote songs and worked for other artists such as Stevie Wonder and Rick James. They were on top of the world. By the mid-80s, they had over a dozen top 10 hits, and they also won several more Grammys and appeared on the top TV sitcoms such as The Love Boat. However, along with the fame and fortune came also one luxury that would eventually take over their lives: drugs, hard drugs, namely cocaine and crack. During the early 70s, the drug of choice was cocaine for celebrities, and for the girls it was pretty easy to come by. One drawback at that time was the belief that cocaine was not addictive. That sentiment made it appealing. However, as the 70s ended, a new drug was introduced: crack cocaine. Crack cocaine and the act of freebasing took over. There were two issues about crack cocaine that had a major impact, especially on the urban environment. One was that you can freebase it, meaning that you could smoke it instead of snorting it, making it more potent, thereby getting a better experience with it. Also, it was extremely cheap compared to other drugs. The girls would develop a habit of freebasing that would last for years. Another issue also came about with Ruth around this time, and that was when she developed a relationship with the lead singer of The Temptations, Dennis Edwards. They had a tumultuous affair that would last some time. However, there was one problem with this. Ruth was already married to her third husband, and Dennis was engaged to soul singer Aretha Franklin. Eventually, Dennis would dump Aretha for Ruth. He and Ruth would get so much into the freebasing that eventually Dennis would miss shows and appearances with the Temptations. Some say this is why he was fired from the group. At one point, Dennis and Ruth would get married and give birth to a child named Asa. Aretha didn't take this too well, and almost until the day of her death, would never let Ruth forget about taking Dennis away from her. After a year, Dennis and Ruth divorced. However, this wasn't the only change Ruth was about to endure. By the mid-80s, Ruth had gotten sick contracting meningitis. The doctors told her she would have to quit freebasing or she would die. She took that to heart. She used her children as motivation to quit, and after several months of therapy and treatment, she was able to kick the habit. However, the freebasing had done so much damage to her mouth that she had to have reconstructive surgery. Eventually, she would fall in love again and get married in the early 90s. Ruth had her fair share of adversity. She got married at a young age, however, had a husband who was overly abusive. In interviews, she talked about how her husband would use her arm to put out his cigarettes. Leaving him and joining the group seemed to be her way out. The good news is Ruth was able to overcome her issues, kick her habit, and move on with her life. However, the bad news is you can't say the same for Bonnie and June. By the mid-80s, the popularity that the girls were experiencing started to wane, and they would even start recording less. June would make attempts to strike out on her own. Around 1983, June released a solo album which met with little success. Then in 1985, she did a spread for Playboy magazine, which also got very little attention. In the late 80s, she made another attempt at a solo album, but again failed to reach any type of success. When the 90s rolled around, the girls together continued to perform and tour despite not recording. However, as the decade came to an end, it seemed the girls started to grow tired of June's personal issues. Around 1984, she made headlines for the first time when it was reported that she beat up one of her relatives inside of her home. The report stated June had a relative and her husband over to her house. The husband tried to force his wife to leave with him and a brawl broke out. By the time the police arrived, everyone was hurt, including June, who had a bloody nose. Also, June's crack addiction started to get way out of hand. It got to the point where she had crackheads, some who were complete strangers, living inside of her house. As the millennium rolled in, it appears the girls had had enough. They had officially kicked June out of the group. The sisters, through their attorneys, served her with papers to let her know that she was no longer in the group and could not use the name Pointer Sisters. She was replaced by Ruth's daughter, Issa. Around 2004, things grew worse for June when she was arrested for cocaine possession outside of Bonnie's apartment. This actually was a wake-up call for her, and she started to get treatment. Afterwards, June would continue to perform as a solo artist in areas like Las Vegas. Around 2006, things for June would turn for the absolute worst. She got sick for what was believed to be a stroke and had to be hospitalized. While she was there and being treated by doctors, she learned that she was in the latter stages of cancer. Cancer started in her lungs and metastasized to other parts of her body. By the time they diagnosed it, it was too late to do anything about it. At this point, she would never go back home again. When Ruth and Anita found out, they and their brothers immediately rushed to the hospital to be by June's side. Everyone showed up except for Bonnie. The media approached Bonnie as to why she wasn't by her sister's bedside. She said that she would be there in spirit. June officially died in April of 2006. What made the situation worse was the bad publicity that arose from the conflict between Bonnie and her sisters. Instead of that time being used to celebrate June's life and legacy, the focus was on the family issues and the feuds they were having against each other. Bonnie had gone public saying that the girls did not follow June's wishes as to her burial. At the funeral, it was reported that the sisters would not allow Bonnie to ride with them in the family vehicle. The girls responded publicly to Bonnie's accusation, saying that she was just upset because they refused her demands to be let back in the group. Bonnie, over the course of her career, met with little success as a solo artist. Also, by this time, she had separated from her husband. However, she would still continue to perform, yet she also had her fair share of troubles as well. Around 2011, she would gain national attention when she was arrested for possession of a controlled substance. She was driving with two other people and were pulled over by the police for a taillight issue. They noticed drug paraphernalia in her car and she was arrested. In June of 2020, the worst would happen. While at her home in California, Bonnie suffered cardiac arrest and died at 3:30 in the morning. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been suffering from cirrhosis of the liver stemming from alcohol abuse. She was 69 years old. Anita had her fair share of tragedy as well. Just like the other girls, she indulged in drugs in order to cope with the pain that she was dealing with. She got married at a young age and gave birth to a daughter. In an interview, she explained, "In 1999, I lost the love of my life. In 2000, my mom died. In 2003, my daughter died. In 2006, my sister died. And in 2011, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I spent a year healing from the chemo and radiation." Around 2015, she was told she had to retire. While on stage, she suddenly got sick and was rushed to the hospital. She was told by doctors that she wasn't in good health, and if she could retire, she should. She was replaced by Ruth's granddaughter. Since then, she's been promoting her new book about her times with the Pointer sisters. Despite the tragedy the Pointer sisters have faced, it is remarkable that they accomplished all that they did. They haven't gotten the recognition they deserve for achieving 13 top 20 hits, despite going through physical abuse, drug addiction, and major illness. Hopefully someone will do a TV movie about their life as well.